Hey folks, welcome back to AI Unplugged. I'm your host Travis Frisinger, and today we're going to recap some amazing demos from last night's Boulder AI Builders Meetup. They had some heavy hitters like Google and NVIDIA, along with some exciting up-and-comers like Plotzy, ShowStop, and CodeYam. What I like about this meetup is that there's a wide variety of folks. Like you do get the Googles and the NVIDIAs coming, and you get a lot of like startups. There's a heavy startup scene here. It's always cool. We start off with like kind of announcements, who's hiring, who's willing, who's looking for money, who's willing to write checks. Got the VCs right in the room there. If you're compelling, it's a beautiful thing about living in the area. Anyway, I know I was meant to do kind of an eval, a vibe-based eval thing for this one, but there's a lot going on in the community. I think it's nice to showcase, so I'm going to try and kind of make this a regular segment. Now, the meetups are every month. But they're only in Boulder every other month. Otherwise, they're down in Denver. Being a typical Boulderite, I don't necessarily feel like driving all the way. But I'm grateful to all the folks who make the effort to make this happen. It's a really great community. First, let's talk about some of the great work Google's up to now. They've got some experiments that they're working on. AI focused. Who isn't AI focused these days? But they were the first ones up, and they're talking about the kind of the data science agent. I'll have all the links to all of this in the description. Don't worry. And the idea is that it's a tool to kind of streamline the data science workflow. We're using AI to generate in the Google Colab notebooks for a variety of data analytic tasks. What's really interesting here is how it simplifies and automates common things like data cleaning, exploration, plotting, even predictive modeling. So how does it work? Well, you start off by giving the agent a description of what you want to learn from your data and uploading up to 3 data sets. The agent's then going to construct a notebook with all the necessary code, explanations, planning, and reasonings in near real time. What's cool is it's interactive, so you can review the plan, make adjustments, and then let the agent generate and execute the notebook. Now, I mean, obviously, Google's using Gemini. They're using some of their big models. They've probably done a little fine tuning, if I understand the presenter correctly, which is great. They're off trying to conduct experiments, find utility with generative AI, and that's really my interest. What are people building? What's the utility? So it really allows the agents to handle complex workflows. I'm going to say similar to human data scientist. It was very much it belonged in the labs section. Not amazing results, but like you can see the potential. It's not just about creating the code. It was about creating well-structured, documented, functional notebooks to kind of help people focus, the data scientists focus on more strategic tasks. That's the goal here. Encouraging feedbacks. They really wanted feedback from people to help refine the tool, play around with it. Let me know what you think. But I think there's potential there. Following on from Google was a company called Plotzy. So what are they doing? They're kind of approaching the property research space. It's a pretty niche space. Lots of information, lots of PDFs, lots of data in this space is always notoriously complicated, hard to deal with. The presenter was talking about how some of his clients have up to 50 different bookmarks that they're trying to pull various information from, right? It's a government level issue, right? Like, data is never in a great state, specifically when you're dealing with government organizations. So it's a RAG type system. It's about speeding up the research by pulling in data directly from public records, other sources of information, ownership, tax value, permitted use, all at your fingertips, where before you had to do a lot of cross-referencing, a lot of more traditional research. I think one of the standout features here was the ability to find an owner's contact information. Now, that may sound kind of weird or odd. I've spent some time in the data game. Your data's out there. It does. No one's. People are probably reselling it. That's kind of how I got some of it back in the day. And it's all legal. It's all above board. It's annoying, but that's just kind of how the world works. So be it. But it doesn't stop there. Plotzy also offers AI-powered zoning research, where you can ask it questions about things like permitted use, or highlight restrictions and get instant answers, complete with source links. However, this feature is currently limited to selected municipalities. So they're kind of really zoning in on the Colorado area, probably more specifically around Boulder here, and Denver area. They're working with it. Like I said, this data is hard. It's unstructured data. A lot of what we're dealing in the AI space these days is unstructured data. But it was cool. It was interesting. Like I could definitely see utility. It's a very niche product, but they're really working hard at getting AI to add value, augmenting the people, making their workflows better, faster, stronger. Next up was the probably one that it's interesting. I'm fascinated by all the things, the use cases out there. This one was called ShowStop, and it's about creating digital marketing ads from your existing content. So the idea is that you're going to reuse kind of your ads, your copy, all of that stuff. You upload the media. You tell it kind of your audience what the product is. It's going to go through and utilize the information you have, the data you have, copy, reviews, all that stuff. To generate these short little adverts, you can go in and tweak the ads. It doesn't have a timeline editor, but it's kind of got like a major chunk editor. I don't know, a chapter type editor. The people out there. So initially they were using AI generated stuff, and the feedback was this is unusable in an ad format. Like you can't have all these kind of weird, funky things that come out in AI generated image video. So they started leaning into kind of the reuse of existing stuff. And the space this is filling is kind of the replacement for the Fiverr, going and getting a cheap resource overseas to do a lot of manual labor. Once again, in the interest of making things better, faster, stronger, right? Like giving me a set of options to choose from. Kind of back to that creative concept I explored in Mr. Fluffle's Tiny Reign of Terror. The idea is that we're making things more efficient. I think that between this and Plotzy, the goal is efficiency, right? With Google, it was experimentation, hopefully towards efficiency. And then once again, we had NVIDIA last session, so it would have been July, June, when NVIDIA was here at the meetup again. This time they're talking about their integration with Hugging Face, the NIP API, and kind of like serverless inference. So being able to run models, do the inference without having to worry about a whole lot of infrastructure. Now, there's a limited set of models they work with, obviously for good reasons. The key here is simplicity and cost effectiveness. So it's kind of like being able to spin a new model up and do an open AI API type thing. So rather than solving for infrastructure and optimizing processes, you're able to kind of just go. In fact, I believe they standardize on kind of OpenAI's API as the API. So you can run inference with just a few lines of code. It's really easy to get up. The cost is pretty comparable. And this time you pay not per token, but for compute time. So whether you're developing things at large scale or experimenting with new models, it's a great tool to get out there and kind of avoid a lot of the I would call it analysis paralysis, but kind of the infrastructure freeze. You're like, oh gosh, I got to do all these things. I love tools that allow me to get out there, be simple, really iterate on a concept. That's pretty key to how I'm writing the stuff I'm doing with generative AI. Is start with a small concept, find the utility, make sure there's utility there, figure out how to expand and grow that utility moving out, but then possibly and likely building more code to facilitate that. Maybe not. Maybe there's a new way you discovered to do the process. And then finally we rounded out the whole session with CodeYam. So it's an enhancement tool for code reviews. The value proposition seems a little less clear to me. Maybe it's something I need to go play with. Now, I am aware of a product called CodeRabbit, which does PR reviews, comes back, gives me a summary, does a whole lot of stuff. I see CodeRabbit, not CodeYam, CodeRabbit, different company, wasn't there last night. Has gotten Series A funding. Now, I really do. I remember using it pre-seed, and it was too verbose, and it was really annoying. And I did some work here on one of my projects, and I noticed that it was still running, and that it was a lot more succinct and a lot more potentially valuable in the information it's giving me about those changes. It does take a while. That's the only other piece of feedback with these types of tools. But anyway, back to CodeYam. It's a tool designed to supercharge your pull request process. So CodeYam runs simulations of your code changes in real time, allowing developers to see the impact of their changes before they're merged. So theoretically, let's say you've got a web page. Let's say it's an invoicing web page, and I don't know, you need to display something new in your line items. You're restructuring, they're movable. You change it to that component would then kind of run through some scenarios, think like integration type testing, and then it's going to kind of show you the results of trying to do that testing. Great. I get that there's a usability utility there that maybe I don't have to download and go. You can tweak some of those scenarios so you can change the information. The idea is to kind of lean into quality, avoid bugs. I wasn't too clear on how they mocked out the backend. I mean, they said they didn't mock it and it's real, but at some point it needs infrastructure, it needs data, right? So there isn't apparently a specific format you need to meet, but it was a really kind of limited set of technologies. It really seemed to lean into the React space and kind of making sure that things are composed correctly there. Something I'm definitely going to have to explore a little bit more because anything that's allowing me to be better in that development space, I really think there's going to be some more tooling coming out in 2025. I'm focused around that. That's where I'm seeing some really cool agentic stuff. I think CodeYam's agentic. Agentic being it's not just kind of our chat wrapper, but there's multiple processes and things being coordinated and potentially like scheduled jobs feeding the standalone agents that do things. I think that's kind of where I'm landing on agentic for the moment. It is definitely part of my larger body of work body of knowledge that I want to eventually get to. But yeah, I just wanted to share some of the things happening out in the industry. I think I'm uniquely positioned to kind of, see some of the latest startups alongside some of the big players in the game and what they're working on. Lots of cool stuff from Google's data science to NVIDIA's serverless inference to Plotzy. I think Plotzy's the winner for me. To ShowStop, the ad creator, and finally CodeYam, kind of AI-driven code review tool. I think they're still early stage. There's 2 founders, probably that pre-seed type state. So anyway, which tools are you most excited about? Give them a whirl. Let me know what you think in the comments, and stay tuned for next week's episode where I really, really hope I can dive into the world of AI evals, what they are, how to use them, and kind of why vibe-based evaluations might be your first step into taming LLM output. Just like in the world of TDD, there's a green bar pattern, a way of kind of getting a test from failing to successful called fake it. And that's what vibe-based evals kind of feel like. There's a big old world of things I need to worry about, but how do I kind of cut all that out and just make those tiny little steps to get comfortable of it? That's what the fake it green bar pattern's about. You can check that out on my TDD Buddy website. Link in the description. But for now, thanks for tuning into AI Unplugged. Don't forget to visit my blog, aibuddy.software. Follow my live stream, GPT with me on YouTube. And until next time, keep experimenting and stay curious. Thanks, everyone.